November 24, 1971. On Thanksgiving Eve, a man approached the flight counter for Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. Using cash, the man bought a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute trip north to Seattle, Tacoma International Airport. On his ticket, the man listed his name as Dan Cooper. Eyewitnesses described Cooper as a white male in his mid-40s, with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes, carrying a black attaché case and a brown paper bag. Cooper boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727-100. Cooper took a seat in the last row and ordered a drink, a bourbon and 7-Up, from a flight attendant. Including Cooper, Flight 305 had 36 passengers aboard and a crew of 6. Captain William A. Scott, First Officer William Bill J. Radizak, Flight Engineer Harold E. Anderson, and flight attendants Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow, and Florence Schaffner. Flight 305 left Portland on schedule at 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Schaffner, who was sitting in the jump seat at the rear of the airplane, directly behind Cooper. Assuming the note was a lonely businessman's telephone number, Schaffner dropped the note unopened into her purse. Cooper then leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note. In neat, all-capital letters printed with a felt-tip pen, Cooper had written, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." Schaffner returned the note to Cooper, sat down as he requested, and asked quietly to see the bomb. Cooper opened his attaché case, and Schaffner saw what appeared to be a bomb. A large cylindrical battery attached with wires to 2 rows of 4 red cylinders she assumed were dynamite. Cooper closed the briefcase and told Schaffner his demands. Schaffner wrote a note with Cooper's demands, brought it to the cockpit, and informed the flight crew of the situation. Captain Scott directed Schaffner to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of events as they happened. He then relayed to Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota the hijackers' demands. Cooper requests $200,000 in a knapsack by 5 p.m. He wants 2 front parachutes, 2 back parachutes. He wants the money in negotiable American currency. By requesting 2 sets of parachutes, Cooper implied he planned to take a hostage with him, thereby discouraging authorities from supplying non-functional equipment. With Schaffner in the cockpit, Flight Attendant Mucklow sat next to Cooper to act as a liaison between him and the flight crew. Cooper made additional demands through Mucklow. Upon landing at Seattle-Tacoma, fuel trucks must meet the plane, and all passengers must remain seated while Mucklow brought the money aboard the plane. Cooper said he would release the passengers after he had the money. The last items brought aboard would be the 4 parachutes. Scott informed SeaTac Air Traffic Control of the situation, who contacted the Seattle Police Department and the FBI. The passengers were told their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty. Donald Nyrop, the president of Northwest at the time, authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. For approximately 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound in a holding pattern to give the SPD and the FBI sufficient time to assemble Cooper's ransom money and parachutes, and to mobilize emergency personnel. On board the aircraft, Cooper demanded Mucklow remain by his side at all times. Mucklow later said Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain. While looking out the window, he remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft flew above it. When Mucklow told Cooper the parachutes were coming from McChord Air Force Base, Cooper correctly noted McChord was only a 20-minute drive from Seattle-Tacoma. She later described the hijacker's demeanor. Cooper was not nervous. He seemed rather nice and he was not cruel or nasty. While the aircraft continued circling Seattle, Mucklow chatted with Cooper and asked why he chose Northwest Airlines to hijack. Cooper laughed and said, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airline. It's just because I have a grudge." Before he explained the flight simply suited his needs. Cooper asked where Mucklow was from. She answered she was originally from Pennsylvania but was living in Minneapolis at the time. Cooper responded Minnesota was very nice country. Mucklow asked where Cooper was from, but he became upset and refused to answer. The $200,000 ransom was received from Seattle First National Bank in a bag weighing approximately 19 pounds. This was because the ransom money was made of 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, as Cooper had specifically requested. The money, most of which had serial numbers beginning with L, and thus indicated issuance by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. The SPD obtained the 2 front, reserve, parachutes from a local skydiving school, and the 2 back, main, parachutes from a local stunt pilot.
Around 5:24, Captain Scott was informed the parachutes had been delivered to Seattle-Tacoma and notified Cooper they would be landing soon. At 5:46, Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma. With Cooper's permission, Scott parked the aircraft on a partially lit runway, away from the main terminal. Cooper demanded only one representative of the airline approach the plane with the parachutes and money, and the only entrance and exit would be through the aircraft's front door via boarding stairs. Northwest Seattle Operations Manager, Lee, was designated to be the courier. To avoid the possibility Cooper might mistake Lee's airline uniform for a law enforcement officer, he changed into civilian clothes for the task. With the passengers remaining seated, a ground crew attached a boarding stair. Per Cooper's directive, Mucklow exited the aircraft through the front door and retrieved the bag containing the ransom money. When she returned, she carried the bag past the seated passengers to Cooper in the last row. Cooper then agreed to release the passengers. As they disembarked, Cooper inspected the money. In an attempt to break the tension, Mucklow jokingly asked Cooper if she could have some of it. Cooper readily agreed and handed her a packet of bills, but she immediately returned the money and explained accepting gratuities was against company policy. She said Cooper had tried to tip her and the other 2 flight attendants earlier in the flight with money from his pocket, but they had each declined, citing the policy. With the passengers safely disembarked, only Cooper and the 6 crew members remained aboard. In accordance with his demands, Mucklow made 3 trips outside the aircraft to retrieve the parachutes, which she brought to him in the rear of the plane. While Mucklow brought aboard the parachutes, Schaffner asked Cooper if she could retrieve her purse, stored in a compartment behind his seat. Cooper agreed and told her he would not bite her. Flight attendant Hancock then asked Cooper if the flight attendants could leave, to which he replied, "Whatever you girls would like." So Hancock and Schaffner disembarked. When Mucklow brought the final parachute to Cooper, she gave him printed instructions for using the parachutes, but Cooper said he did not need them. A problem with the refueling process caused a delay, so a second truck and then a third were brought to the aircraft to complete the refueling. During the delay, Mucklow said Cooper complained the money was delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as he had directed, and he now had to improvise a new way to transport the money. Using a pocket knife, he cut the canopy from one of the reserve parachutes and stuffed some of the money into the empty parachute bag. A Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) official requested a face-to-face meeting with Cooper aboard the aircraft, but Cooper denied the request. Cooper became impatient, saying, "This shouldn't take so long. Let's get this show on the road." Cooper then gave the cockpit crew his flight plan and directives: a southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, approximately 100 knots altitude. Cooper also instructed Radizak to keep the landing gear deployed, lower the wing flaps to 15 degrees, and leave the cabin unpressurized. First Officer Radizak informed Cooper the configuration limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, so a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper and the crew discussed options, agreeing on Reno, Tahoe International Airport, as the refueling stop. Cooper further directed the aircraft take off with the aft exit door open and its air stair extended. Northwest officials objected for reasons of safety, but Cooper countered by saying, "It can be done. Do it." However, Cooper relented and said he would lower the air stair himself once they were airborne. Cooper demanded Mucklow remain aboard to assist the operation. Around 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off, with only Cooper, Mucklow, Scott, Radizak, and Flight Engineer Anderson aboard. 2 F-16 fighters from McCord Air Force Base, plus a Lockheed T-33 trainer, diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission, followed the 727. All 3 jets maintained flight patterns to stay behind the slow-moving 727 and out of Cooper's view. After takeoff, Cooper instructed Mucklow to lower the aft air stair. Mucklow told him and the flight crew she feared being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested Mucklow come to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope with which she could tie herself to a seat. Cooper rejected the suggestion, stating he did not want her going up front or the flight crew coming back to the cabin. Mucklow continued to express her fear to Cooper and asked him to cut some cord from one of the parachutes to create a safety line for her. Cooper said he would lower the air stair, instructed her to go to the cockpit, close the curtain partition between the coach and first-class sections, and not return. Before she left, Mucklow begged Cooper, please take the bomb with you." Cooper replied he would either disarm it or take it with him. As Mucklow walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw Cooper standing in the aisle tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. From takeoff to when Mucklow entered the cockpit, 4 to 5 minutes had elapsed. For the rest of the flight to Reno, Mucklow remained in the cockpit and was the last person to see Cooper. Around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light flashed, indicating the air stair had been deployed. Scott and Radizak used the plane's intercom to ask Cooper if he needed assistance, but Cooper declined. The crew's ears popped from the drop in air pressure from the aft exit door being opened. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. In his interview with the FBI, Radizak said the sudden upward pitch occurred while the flight was near Portland's northern suburbs. With the aft exit door open and its air stair deployed, the flight crew remained in the cockpit, unsure if Cooper was still aboard. Mucklow used the intercom to inform Cooper they were approaching Reno, and he needed to raise the air stair so the airplane could land safely. She repeated her requests as the pilots made the final approach to land, but neither Mucklow nor the flight crew received a reply from Cooper. At 11:02 p.m., with the air stair still deployed, Flight 305 landed at Reno, Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and Reno police established a perimeter around the aircraft. Fearing the hijacker and the bomb were still aboard, they did not approach the plane. Scott searched the cabin and confirmed Cooper was no longer aboard. After a 30-minute search, an FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. In addition to 66 latent fingerprints aboard the plane, FBI agents recovered Cooper's black clip-on tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened and had 3 shroud lines cut from the canopy. Investigators interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno, and developed a series of composite sketches. Local and federal authorities immediately began questioning possible suspects. In a rush to meet a deadline, reporter James Long of the Oregon Journal recorded the name Dan Cooper as D.B. Cooper. United Press International Wire Service reporter Clyde Jabin republished Long's error, and as other media outlets repeated the error, the name D.B. Cooper stuck. Acting on the possibility the hijacker may have used his real name or the same alias in a previous crime, Portland police discovered and interviewed a local resident named D.B. Cooper. The Portland Cooper had a minor police record but was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Due to the number of variables and parameters, precisely defining the area to search was difficult. The 727's airspeed estimates varied. The environmental conditions along the flight path varied with the aircraft's location and altitude, and only Cooper knew how long he remained in free fall before pulling his ripcord. 106 pilots neither saw anyone jumping from the airliner nor did their radar detect a deployed parachute. A black-clad man jumping into the moonless night would be difficult to see, especially given the limited visibility, cloud cover, and lack of ground lighting. 33 pilots did not make visual contact with the 727. On December 6, 1971, 12 days after the incident, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the use of a U.S. Air Force State Route 71 Blackbird to retrace and photograph Flight 305's flight path and attempt to locate the items Cooper carried during his jump. The State Route 71 made 5 such flights. Due to poor visibility, the photography attempts were unsuccessful. In an experimental recreation, flying the same aircraft used in the hijacking in the same flight configuration, FBI agents pushed a 200-pound sled out of the aft air stair and were able to reproduce the upward motion of the tail section and brief change in cabin pressure described by the flight crew at 8:13 p.m. Initial extrapolations placed Cooper's landing zone within an area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin, an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. Search efforts concentrated on Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the largely forested terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also performed. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. Neither Cooper nor any of the equipment he presumably carried were found. Using fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard, the FBI coordinated an aerial search along the entire flight path, known as Victor 23 in U.S. aviation terminology and as Vector 23 in most Cooper literature, from Seattle to Reno. Although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated, nothing relevant to the hijacking was found. Soon after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents aided by some 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days in March, and then another 18 days in April. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. Two local women stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County. It was later identified as the remains of Barbara and Derry, a teenage girl believed to have been abducted and murdered several weeks earlier by Warren Forrest, a suspected serial killer. Ultimately, the extensive search and recovery operation uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking. Based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Cooper's drop zone was first estimated to be between the Lewis River Dam to the north and the town of Battleground, Washington, to the south. In March 1972, after a joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines and the Air Force, the FBI determined Cooper probably jumped over the city of La Center, Washington. In 2019, the FBI released a report detailing the burglary of a grocery store, about 3 hours after Cooper jumped, near Hyson, Washington. Hyson, an unincorporated community, was within the calculated drop zone Northwest Orient Airlines presented to the FBI. In the report, the FBI noted the burglar took only survival items, such as beef jerky and gloves. However, the report also noted the burglar wore military-type boots with a corrugated sole, while Cooper was described as wearing slip-on shoes. 1 month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, businesses with routine transactions involving large amounts of cash, and to law enforcement agencies around the world. Northwest Orient Airlines offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money, to a maximum of $25,000. In early 1972, the serial numbers were released to the general public. Two men used counterfeit $20 bills printed with Cooper serial numbers to swindle $30,000 from a Newsweek reporter named Carl Fleming in exchange for an interview with a man they falsely claimed was the hijacker. In early 1973, with the ransom money still missing, the Oregon Journal republished the serial numbers and offered $1,000 to the first person to turn in a ransom bill to the newspaper or any FBI field office. In Seattle, the Post-Intelligencer made a similar offer with a $5,000 reward. The offers remained in effect until Thanksgiving 1974, although, despite several near matches reported, no genuine bills were found. In 1975, Northwest Orient Airlines' insurer, Global Indemnity Company, complied with an order from the Minnesota Supreme Court and paid the airline's $180,000 claim on the ransom money. Analysis of the flight data indicated the first estimated location of Cooper's landing zone was inaccurate. Captain Scott, who was flying the aircraft manually because of Cooper's speed and altitude demands, determined the flight path was farther east than initially reported. Additional data provided by Continental Airlines pilot Tom Bowen, who was flying 4 minutes behind Flight 305, led the FBI to recalculate its estimates for Cooper's drop zone. Bowen observed the FBI's calculations for Cooper's drop zone were based on incorrectly recorded wind direction, and therefore the FBI's estimates were inaccurate. Based on Bowen's data and subsequent recalculations of the flight path, the FBI determined Cooper's drop zone was probably over the Washougal River watershed. In 1986, FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach wrote, "I have to confess, if I were going to look for Cooper, I would head for the Washougal. The Washougal Valley and the surrounding areas were repeatedly searched, but no discoveries traceable to the hijacking have been reported." During their forensic search of the aircraft, FBI agents found 4 major pieces of evidence, each with a direct physical link to Cooper. FBI agents found a black clip-on necktie in seat 18E, where Cooper had been seated. Attached to the tie was a gold tie clip with a circular mother-of-pearl setting in the center of the clip. The FBI determined the tie had been sold exclusively at JCPenney department stores, but had been discontinued in 1968. By late 2007, the FBI had built a partial DNA profile from samples found on Cooper's tie in 2001. However, the FBI acknowledged no evidence linked Cooper to the source of the DNA sample. FBI Special Agent Fred Gutt said, "The tie had 2 small DNA samples and 1 large sample. It's difficult to draw firm conclusions from these samples." The FBI also made public a file of previously unreleased evidence, including Cooper's airline ticket, composite sketches and fact sheets, and posted a request for information about Cooper's identification. In March 2009, a group of citizen sleuths, using GPS, satellite imagery, and other new technologies began reinvestigating components of the case. Known as the Cooper Research Team CRT. Although the CRT obtained little new information about the buried ransom money or Cooper's landing zone, they found, analyzed, and identified hundreds of organic and metallic particles on Cooper's tie. Using electron microscopy, the CRT identified lycopodium spores, the source of which was likely pharmaceutical. The team also found minute particles of unalloyed titanium on the tie, along with particles of other chemicals. The metal and rare earth particles suggested Cooper may have worked for Boeing or another aeronautical engineering company, at a chemical manufacturing plant, or at a metal fabrication and production facility. The material with the most significance was the unalloyed titanium. During the 1970s, the use of pure titanium was extremely rare and specialized, and would only be used in aircraft fabrication facilities, or at chemical companies combining titanium and aluminum to store extremely corrosive substances. Cerium and strontium sulfide were used by Boeing's Supersonic Transport Development Project and by Portland factories in which cathode ray tubes were manufactured, such as Teledyne and Tektronix, which are big tech companies. Cooper researcher Eric Eulis has speculated the titanium antimony alloys are linked to Rimcrew Titanium Incorporated, a metals manufacturer and Boeing contractor. FBI agents found 2 hair samples in Cooper's seat, a single strand of limb hair on the seat, and a single strand of brown Caucasian head hair on the headrest. The limb hair was destroyed after the FBI crime laboratory determined the sample lacked enough unique microscopic characteristics to be useful. However, the FBI crime laboratory determined the head hair was suitable for future comparison and preserved the hair on a microscope slide. During their attempts to build Cooper's DNA profile in 2002, the FBI discovered the hair sample had been lost. In the armrest ashtray of seat 18E, FBI agents found 8 Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette butts. The butts were sent to the FBI crime laboratory, but investigators were unable to find fingerprints and returned the butts to the Las Vegas field office. In 1998, the FBI sought to extract DNA from the cigarette butts, but discovered the butts had been destroyed while in the custody of the Las Vegas field office. The FBI speculated that D.B. Cooper carefully planned the hijacking using extensive knowledge of aviation and the Boeing 727. Cooper chose the very last row to monitor the cabin, prevent anyone from sneaking up behind him, and remain inconspicuous. He demanded 4 parachutes so authorities would assume he might force a hostage to jump with him, preventing them from giving him sabotaged equipment. His choice of a bomb also stopped anyone from rushing him. He meticulously retrieved almost all evidence, including his notes and an empty matchbook, though he accidentally left behind his clip-on tie. Cooper specifically chose this aircraft because its unique design, featuring 3 engines and an aft, rear, air stair, made it ideal for a parachute jump. He was also familiar with its refueling times. By demanding a 15 degrees flap setting, Cooper kept the plane in slow, low-altitude flight without stalling, allowing him to control the flight conditions from the cabin so he wouldn't have to risk entering the cockpit. Cooper knew a secret feature unknown to civilian crews. The rear air stair could be lowered mid-flight and could not be overridden by the pilots. The FBI speculated he learned this because the CIA used 727s for airdrops during the Vietnam War. Cooper handled and put on his parachutes with extreme familiarity and ease. While this led to speculation that he was a military paratrooper, an FBI investigative leader later theorized that Cooper may have actually been an Air Force cargo loader. This role would explain his specific knowledge of aircraft capabilities, emergency parachutes, and deploying items mid-flight, though it wouldn't guarantee he had the skills to survive the jump he made. Though the FBI have never publicly stated an official position regarding Cooper's fate, agents who worked on the investigation held mixed opinions. The special agent in charge of the Seattle FBI office at the time of the hijacking, J. Earl Milnes, believed that Cooper survived. In a 1976 interview, he stated that he thought Cooper got away with it and cited 3 reasons. First, he believed that the 727 would be a safe airliner to jump from. Second, that the area Cooper jumped into between Woodland and Vancouver features wide open spaces, ideal for parachute landings. Lastly, Milnes believed that the weather conditions were adequate for a safe parachute jump. In October 1976, another senior FBI agent from the Seattle office, speaking anonymously, opined in the Seattle Times, "I think he made it. I think he slept in his own bed that night. It was a clear night. A lot of the country is pretty flat. He could have just walked out, right down the road. Hell, they weren't even looking for him there at the time. They thought he was somewhere else. He could just walk down the road." Agent Ralph Himmelsbach was originally dubious of Cooper's chances, but the survival of all 5 of Cooper's copycat jumpers caused him to revise his estimation to a 50% chance of survival. In his 1986 book, Norjack, Himmelsbach cited 3 copycats in particular who influenced his opinion: Martin McNally, Frederick Hahnman, and Richard LaPointe. McNally jumped with just a front reserve parachute, without protective gear, at night, over Indiana. Unlike Cooper, who appeared to be familiar with parachutes, McNally had to be shown how to put on his parachute. Additionally, McNally's pilot increased the airspeed to 320 knots, 590 kilometers per hour, nearly twice the airspeed of Flight 305 at the time of Cooper's jump. This speed created a violent jump, causing the money bag containing $500,000 to be ripped away from McNally. Yet he had landed unharmed except for some superficial scratches and bruises. Hahnman hijacked a 727 in Pennsylvania and survived after jumping at night into a Honduran jungle. The third copycat, LaPointe, hijacked a 727 in Nevada. Wearing only trousers, a shirt, and cowboy boots, LaPointe jumped into the freezing January wind over northern Colorado and landed in the snow. Other agents have been vocal in their belief that Cooper perished that night. In 1980, Thomas Manning, the agent who led all of the ground searches in 1971 and 1972, told a journalist that he believed Cooper landed in Lake Merwin. Manning opined that Cooper's body was never found because the shroud lines from his parachute were snagged on one of the numerous logs sitting on the bottom of the lake. In 2007, case agent Larry Carr speculated Cooper did not survive his jump for several reasons. First, Carr believed Cooper appeared to lack the necessary skydiving knowledge, skills, and experience for the type of jump he attempted. Carr said, "We originally thought Cooper was an experienced jumper, perhaps even a paratrooper." He further said, "We concluded after a few years this was simply not true. No experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch-black night, in the rain, with a 172 miles per hour wind in his face wearing loafers and a trench coat. It was simply too risky." However, skydiving instructor Earl Casey, who packed the parachutes, advised the FBI that Cooper would not have needed extensive experience to survive the jump, and anyone who had 6 or 7 practice jumps could accomplish this. Though Casey believed Cooper survived, he believed that jumping at night drastically increased the risk of injury, and without jump boots, Cooper would probably have suffered severe ankle or leg injuries upon landing. Second, Carr felt that Cooper did not appear to have the necessary equipment for either his jump or his survival in the woods. He neither brought nor requested a helmet, and jumped into a 15 to 9 degrees Celsius wind at 10,000 feet in November over Washington without proper protection against the extreme wind chill. However, because Cooper was alone in the back of the plane for over half an hour before jumping, it is unknown what he was wearing or how he was equipped when he left the plane. In addition to his attaché case, Cooper carried a paper bag witnesses described as approximately 4 inches tall and slightly smaller, while lying flat, than the width and length of the case. Because Cooper did not use the contents of the bag during any part of the hijacking, the FBI speculated the bag may have contained equipment for his jump, such as boots, gloves, and goggles. Third, Carr believed that Cooper's survival was made all the more difficult because he likely did not have an accomplice waiting on the ground to help him escape. Such an arrangement would have required both a precisely timed jump and the flight crew's cooperation to follow a predetermined flight path. Yet Cooper did not provide the flight crew a specific path. Moreover, when the flight crew proposed, and Cooper agreed, to alter the flight path and fly from Seattle to Reno for refueling, Cooper had no way of keeping an accomplice apprised of his changed plans. The low cloud cover and lack of visibility to the ground further complicated Cooper's ability to determine his location, establish a bearing, or see his landing zone. Finally, Carr felt that because none of the ransom money has ever turned up in circulation, this is further indication that Cooper perished during the jump. Carr said. Diving into the wilderness without a plan, without the right equipment, in such terrible conditions, he probably never even got his chute open. Former FBI agent Richard Tosaw theorized Cooper landed in the Columbia River and drowned. This belief led Tosaw to spend a considerable amount of his own wealth conducting various search operations along the bottom of the Columbia throughout the 1980s, but no updates.
If you liked this kind of content, help us so we can be better.